Our world is full of diagrams. Graphic representations of everything from the solar system to the hidden origins of life. They have a unique ability to express complex ideas simply, and an intellectual and artistic beauty that has the power to inspire awe and change our perceptions. A diagram drawn in the 1480s by one of the greatest creative talents of the Renaissance has gone on to become a world-famous image. This iconic drawing has fascinated and beguiled viewers for hundreds of years. From modern-day political cartoons to contemporary public art, it's now part of the fabric of our culture. The man who made it was Leonardo da Vinci, and the diagram is the Vitruvian Man. In it, he set out to capture, through science and art, the perfection of the human body. The diagram has so many layers to it. It's obviously about the body and human anatomy, and as you dig deeper, you see the geometry and the mathematics. But it's actually a solution to an ancient architectural problem, one about the relative proportions of buildings and men. Others before Leonardo had tried to solve this puzzle and failed. But Leonardo's solution with Vitruvian Man gives us a unique vision into the human body, one that's obsessively symmetrical, deceptively simple, but extraordinarily beautiful. Beneath the diagram's many layers is a complex image that shows man as the perfect geometric model for architecture, and that illustrates a profound idea that the human body is God's supreme creation, the ultimate expression of the cosmos itself. Leonardo da Vinci was one of the greatest artistic talents of the Italian Renaissance. Few places express better that explosion of ideas, painting, writing, architecture and engineering than Venice. Leonardo came from a small Tuscan village a few hundred kilometers from here. But like all artists at the time, he was constantly on the move. He worked in Florence, Milan, also here in Venice. It's difficult to know where to begin with Leonardo. He was an artist, musician, botanist, anatomist, engineer, architect. He was all of these things. He painted probably the most famous painting of all time, the Mona Lisa. He designed military hardware, and he was the first artist to cut open the human body and draw what he saw inside. And it's his drawings which are such an extraordinary legacy. Never has the thirst for knowledge been made so visual. Leonardo's drawings form a vast body of work, covering every imaginable subject in spectacular detail. Feet, skulls and hands, buildings, bridges and machines, muscle and sinews, hearts and lungs. Obsessively, he observed, dissected, and drew as no other artist had ever done before. For him, science and art were one. Their task? To reveal the perfect geometric proportions that governed all of the natural world. And the greatest of all nature's works, God's supreme creation, was man himself. In Leonardo's words, man is the model of the world. Like other great artists at the time, he was inspired by the rediscovery of the only surviving classical work on architecture by the Roman writer Vitruvius.
It contained a challenge that Leonardo couldn't resist. And his response to that challenge is housed here at Venice's Accademia Gallery. The diagram he created drew on his fascination with proportion and geometry in both architecture and the human body.
I'm really excited to get the chance to see this diagram. It's very rarely exhibited, let alone filmed. To actually get a film crew in here to see the diagram is incredibly special. I've been told it's on something called a no-lend list, which means it will never, ever leave this building.
Leonardo drew Vitruvian Man in the 1480s, not long after Vitruvius's seminal work on architecture first appeared in print in Europe. For any building to be beautiful, wrote Vitruvius, it must have perfect symmetry and proportions, like those found in nature. And since nature's most perfect object is man, a perfect building should be proportioned like the human body. Vitruvian Man was Leonardo's response.
So amazing to see the real thing. This is the one that Leonardo da Vinci actually drew in the sort of this brown ink on this beautiful piece of paper. There's something about it. It's kind of intensity and power which makes this image just so extraordinary.
The challenge Vitruvius sets is to place a man on his back with arms outstretched and to have his fingers and toes touch the circumference of a circle centered on the man's navel. And also to place the same figure inside a square.
There's something so timeless about this image. It's, you know, the human body and these mathematical geometric shapes. You can see the way Leonardo has carved into the page. You can really see he's almost digging this image out. It's almost not a drawing, but a carving. And you can see the little marks where the compass has gone in to make the circle and make these shapes. It's absolutely extraordinary. And you've got the writing around this describing actually what all of these proportions are about, because this is actually a solution to an architectural problem. And so there are the different proportions that the body has to each other. So, for example, it says that there are 4 fingers which make up the distance of a palm, and then 6 palms make a cubit, which is the distance from the top of my finger to my elbow. And then you can see that these 4 cubits make up the height of the man, so you can actually see the lines drawn. So this is all about the proportions of the body and its relationship to architecture.
The ratios in Leonardo's text all come from Vitruvius. The elbow to the armpit is 1/8 the man's height. The bottom of the chin to the nose is 1/3 of the face. They are perfect whole number proportions, 1 to 2, to 3, to 4. These perfect ratios bring together 2 ideas that underpin the diagram. That man's body is proportioned according to geometry and mathematics, and that those proportions, applied to architecture, will produce perfect buildings.
I'm intrigued to know, what came first? Was it the geometry and then the man was fit inside this, or did the man sort of force the geometry? I mean, there's something rather extraordinary about Leonardo's picture. He's got the centre of the square shifted down from where the centre of the circle is. It's a little bit of asymmetry here. and the square doesn't fit exactly inside the circle. It kind of squeezes out the outsides. So for me, I'm just intrigued. It's how did he actually make this thing, and what does the whole thing mean?
The geometry of circle and square is the diagram's first layer of meaning. They were seen in the Renaissance as the most perfect shapes in nature. They were also key to Vitruvius. For him, the temple was the ultimate building, as it was close to God, and a square formed the floor, a circle the dome. Leonardo too was drawing many temples at the time he was making Vitruvian Man. Some of Leonardo's contemporaries also tried to solve the famous challenge. Assuming that both shapes had the same center, they produce figures that look all wrong, either sacrificing the man to the geometry or the geometry to the man.
I've been trying to work out how Leonardo actually cracked this puzzle of Vitruvian Man. I've been filling pages and pages of this pad, lots of circles and squares, trying to work out what is the proportion of the square to the diameter of the circle. I'm convinced that the answer to this is something mathematical, but maybe I would say that because I'm a mathematician. But Leonardo also believed in mathematics. He once said that he who does not understand the supreme certainty of mathematics is wallowing in confusion.
Remember that Leonardo was not only a superb artist, but also the inventor of flying machines and submarines. His ability to innovate, to think laterally, was key to his taking on the Vitruvian challenge, as Oxford's Professor Martin Kemp explains.
So is this Leonardo trying to solve the puzzle that's in Vitruvius?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a puzzle to many people. As you think you've got a square and a circle, you simply use the same centres. What Leonardo found, I think, is that he'd say, I've got to get a circle and I've got to get a square, and let's not assume they have to be on the same centre. And he's taken the navel as the centre for the circle, and he then finds to make the square work, he needs to slip it down. And that's the great move, and it makes the whole thing work in a particular kind of way.
The shifting of the centres of circle and square was Leonardo's masterstroke, successfully harmonising the relationship between man and geometry. He did it, it seems, just for himself. And this perfect union of art and science remained unknown for 300 years after it was made.
Leonardo would say that art is a science, a scienza. He sees something that perfectly fits its function, with no redundancy and no inadequacy, as being a perfectly beautiful thing. Therefore, form, function and beauty are locked in together. And that sheer perfection of the detail of everything out there, and its sheer mathematical beauty and its sheer mechanical beauty, is what the human being should do when they make their own things. So if you understand the geometry of the human body, when you design a little circular temple, the ghost of the Vitruvian Man is behind this. It's a reconstruction of nature on the basis of first principles, and there is no more prime principle in Christianity than the human body.
Beneath the diagram's geometry is its next layer of meaning, architecture. Those key principles of form, function and beauty that Leonardo applied to Vitruvian Man are also at the heart of Vitruvius's philosophy of perfect buildings. Those ideas were put into practice most famously by Leonardo's near contemporary Andrea Palladio. The Church of the Redeemer here in Venice is one of his finest achievements.
Palladio's church really captures all the ideas that Vitruvius was talking about in his books on architecture. These ideas of whole number of proportions being the things that we like when we see a building. And you can see it with Palladio here. The entrance is a kind of 1-to-2 relationship. The height of the entrance to the width is in that 1-to-2 relationship. The triangles, for example, the smaller triangle is about the third the size of the larger one. And for Vitruvius, these are all the proportions that you find in the human body. And this is what Leonardo was exploring in his diagram of Vitruvian man. And I think the reason that we're drawn to them is they're somehow harmonic proportions.
Palladio's ability to turn Vitruvian theories into real buildings is his lasting legacy, according to Venice's chief architect, Renato Cordello.
In the past, not all architects think about the relation about mathematical geometry invention. This element go separated in the world, but the human mind can use all together. So that drawing became the most height synthesis of this question. Palladio, Serlio, and so other architects use the tractates to put together theory and practice, and in this way created a language of architecture.
For Leonardo, this new language of harmonic proportions and ratios went beyond the body and architecture. Proportion, he wrote, is found not only in numbers and measurements, but also in sounds, in landscapes, in times and in places.
Leonardo's diagram really goes to the heart of his philosophy of putting man in a universal context, from going from the micro to the macro and back again. But I'm beginning to wonder whether Leonardo's solution is not so much geometrical, but actually has something much more to do with another of his obsessions, understanding human anatomy.
The premise is that the human body is God's most perfect bit of design. You know, it's a central thing that he designed in nature, and he designed it with geometry, but it's functional. Leonardo was the first person both to produce this eyewitness of the sheer reality of portraying the human body in this way, and getting geometrical and dynamic principles out of it, and it's astonishingly original.
Yes, yes.
I mean, if we look at the skull here, this is only a sequence of dated anatomical drawings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's clearly a real skull, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
You know, and he shows how all these nerves, all the sensory nerves, pour into a single point at the geometrical centre, which he calls the sensus communis, the senso commune, or common sense, which is where our term comes from.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing, yeah.
The anatomical perfection of Vitruvian man is no surprise. Leonardo was the first artist ever to carry out a full human autopsy, making his knowledge of the workings of the body far superior to any of his contemporaries.
He tries to get this great understanding of the human body as a total system mirroring the system of the worlds. This is all an expression of internal activity, the dynamism within the human body, the brain, the system of motion in the muscles, and so on. Whether it's the operation of the biceps or a heart valve, for instance. Every small bit of the human body ought to work geometrically. So it's philosophically immensely ambitious. They're philosophical anatomies and not medical anatomies.
With with the help of a volunteer Vitruvian man and an osteopath, I want to see whether the anatomy in Leonardo's drawing is just philosophical, manipulated to fit the geometry, or whether his strict proportions really work in practice.
First thing, of course, is that Vitruvian Man is meant to fit exactly inside a square. So that means the height
right.
is the same as the arm span. So
It should be, yes.
Yeah. So should we see whether Shane...
Why not?
Okay.
The idea of human height being the same as the width across outstretched arms, as in the diagram, seems counterintuitive. But in our experiment, it's almost exactly the same.
193.
Right, so 193.
So it's not bad.
That's
It's
pretty
2
good.
centimetres off.
Yeah, yeah. So an important measurement is the cubit, which is the elbow to the point here, which is sort of... the height is meant to be 4 cubits. So
The cubit is the basic unit that the whole system of Vitruvian proportion relies on. 4 equal cubits make up the height of the man. 1 cubit is the width across the shoulders. And again, we found that all those measurements were almost exactly the same.
When you look at proportions in a setting where you don't expect them to be right, because they look different, the arm length and the height shouldn't work to the naked eye. But when you put them together and the realization that there is height and length, well, there's a magic sense about what Leonardo was trying to do, and some sort of realization that he was right.
We don't know if there was ever a real model for Vitruvian Man. We do know that Leonardo was a compulsive people watcher. At the public baths, in city squares, in suburbs and slums, he sought his subjects. He even spent a whole year finding the right face for Judas for his Last Supper. Out of his people watching comes the diagram's final layer, one that isn't in Vitruvius at all, but is pure Leonardo. Movement. Captured in the diagram by the man's distinctive double pose. Exploring the theme of movement, Martin Kemp and graphic designer Steve Marr collaborated on this remarkable animation for a recent V&A exhibition.
The idea was based upon looking at Leonardo's drawings, and you see lots of drawings by Leonardo in which you have sequences of movement, or even single drawings, and you've got the feeling that he wants them to move. It's a very compelling feeling when you're looking at Leonardo drawings, so I thought it'd be terrific to work with a major animator and to scratch an itch which Leonardo couldn't scratch, because he didn't have the techniques to do so.
The motion is there. I mean, Leonardo was a proto-animator. The attempt to capture movement was there. It was really just bringing together in some cases, sequences of drawings to make them move, to make them run together and actually work as animation. In other cases, it was to kind of bring out the animation that you know is within the original drawing, as with the Vitruvian Man. He was analysing movement, which is what animators do all the time in their everyday life. The way they watch the way people walk down the street, the way they answer the phone. You know, you have to be analysing movement to understand it, to be able to reproduce it, and that's what Leonardo was doing.
You know that he can do these spatial movements in his head. You know, he's like some of the great scientists, Kepler and so on. He can envisage things turning, he can do all this and slicing off geometric bodies. He has an amazing plastic imagination, and these have a kind of mental reality inside the brain.
The 3D potential of Vitruvian Man is realised on a large scale in this contemporary sculpture in London's Belgrave Square.
This sculpture is a really good example of just how iconic Leonardo's diagram has become. It's a really striking sculpture. I'm not really sure, though, that it works in 3 dimensions. It looks a little bit like 2 men rather than the one man in motion that you see in Leonardo's diagram. But what's so amazing is the idea of turning a 500-year-old diagram into a monumental piece of public art. I can't really think of any other diagram that has had the same sort of treatment. And it's a real mark of the power of this diagram to be instantly recognisable and to transmit a message about man and his place in the cosmos that even today we find so appealing.
At the Times newspaper, political cartoonist Peter Brooks makes regular use of this legacy of instant recognisability and visual appeal.
Cartoonists often use well-known paintings as hooks for satire. In other words, they parody a well-known image. And if you want a well-known image, this is probably just about one of the best known. Well, first of all, it's simple in the sense that you can see exactly what it's about. And it's kind of intriguing as well. It's a metaphor for the ideal. The human body was analogous with the universe, and therefore, for me, it's the political universe. And inevitably, I use it to show that political people don't measure up, that they don't achieve the ideal that the actual drawing is about. That's the point. This is a drawing of Silvio Berlusconi, which I did a couple of years ago when he was re-elected. And he needed the support of Italy's Northern League, who are a far-right organisation. So there he is with a fascist salute with one arm. Given that the other appealing thing about it is that it depicts a man with no clothes on, there's nothing more appealing to a cartoonist than to be able to strip politicians down to their bare essentials, so to speak.
Leonardo's extraordinary diagram has joined the pantheon of an elite group of world artworks that have become truly iconic. Its philosophy of placing man in a universal context still speaks to us now, over half a millennium after its creation.
Although the diagram doesn't represent some huge scientific breakthrough which will have great consequences for the future of humanity, its strength is that it captures an idea that mathematics underpins both nature and the man-made world. It represents a synthesis of architecture, anatomy, and geometry. But it's the perfection and elegance of Leonardo's solution to this riddle of the square and the circle in Vitruvius, which gives the diagram its power and its beauty.
There's double comedy coming up next this evening here on BBC HD. Him and Her is at 11, after Reggie Perrin next.